Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the podcast. And today I'm going to do my review of AEW's Collision. Starting off the evening, we'll go to our first match of the night. It is a Continental Classic tournament matchup. It is Daniel Garcia versus Claudio Castagnoli. I thought it was a good match, man. Back and forth matchup between Garcia and Castagnoli, with Castagnoli keeping the pace of the match. Garcia then applies an ankle lock on Castagnoli, but the hold is broken. Castagnoli then applies a sharpshooter on Garcia, and the hold is broken, but Castagnoli hits a powerbomb on Garcia, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Claudio Castagnoli, and he receives 3 points in his tournament matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Killswitch versus the Boys. This was a glorified squash match. Killswitch was keeping the pace throughout the entire match, with Killswitch ultimately hitting the finish, pins for the 3. And your winner of the match is Killswitch. After the match, Killswitch grabs a chair from underneath the ring. Killswitch then hits a chokeslam on one of the boys through a chair. Adam Copeland is here. Copeland then attacks Killswitch, and then Copeland ultimately hits Killswitch with a chair shot. So it looks like Adam Copeland has some unfinished business with Christian, Killswitch, and the Prodigy. So definitely looking forward to what's going to happen next with Adam Copeland. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the House of Black versus Commander and Gravity. I thought it was a decent match. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with the House of Black keeping the pace of the match. Commander then hits a Hurricane Rana, but Matthews ultimately hits a foot stomp, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are the House of Black. Hats off to the House of Black for getting the win in this matchup. Next match we have on the list, it is Julia Hart versus Lady Frost for the TBS Championship. I actually thought this was a really good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Julia Hart and Lady Frost, with Julia Hart keeping the pace of the match. And Julia Hart ultimately applies a submission hold on Lady Frost. Lady Frost taps out, and your winner of the match and still TBS champion is Julia Hart. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is FTR versus the Righteous. I thought it was a good match, back and forth matchup between FTR and the Righteous, with the Righteous keeping the pace of the match. But FTR ultimately hit a Shatter Machine on the Righteous, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are FTR. After the match, Malachi Black grabs a microphone. He's seen walking through the crowd. He mentions Cesaro, Wheeler Yuta, and CM Punk, which I thought was interesting. Then the lights go out, and Malachi Black disappears. So it looks like the House of Black had their sights set on FTR, which will be a great match, and hopefully we get that match in the foreseeable future. Moving on from that, we have a Ricky Starks and Big Bill segment. Ricky Starks mentions Chris Jericho and how they attacked Chris Jericho after the Full Gear media scrum. Ricky and Big Bill then mock Jericho and Omega. They make mentions to different basketball players and stuff like that. Big Bill also mentions his personal life and the struggles that he's had to deal with alcoholism and stuff like that, and people telling him that he would never be back in professional wrestling. It was a great promo from Big Bill. And again, all this is doing is setting up the storyline between Ricky Starks and Big Bill versus Omega and Jericho for the AEW Tag Team Championships. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Keith Lee versus Lee Moriarty. I thought it was a good match, decent match at best. Back and forth matchup between Keith Lee and Lee Moriarty, with Keith Lee keeping the pace of the match. And Keith Lee ultimately hits the finish, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Keith Lee. Hats off to Keith Lee for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of Collision. It's another Continental Classic tournament matchup. It is Eddie Kingston versus Brody King. I thought this was a really good match. Back and forth matchup between Kingston and King, with Eddie Kingston and Brody King both exchanging in the middle of the ring. Brody King was keeping the pace of the match, but Eddie Kingston hits an enziguri, as well as a spinning back fist, but Brody King ultimately hits Dante's Inferno, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Brody King, and Brody King receives 3 points in the Continental Classic tournament. A couple things I want to say about Collision, man, before I get out of here. Couple things, actually. Number one, I'm a big fan of this Continental Classic tournament, and I mentioned this last week as well. I think the tournament's great. I think it's great for AEW. I think it's great for Tony Khan, and it gets fans invested in this tournament. I think some of the matches so far have been really good. This Eddie Kingston versus Brody King match for the main event in Collision was a solid matchup. But with that being said, man, I mean, and again, I know this is a hot topic right now in professional wrestling, CM Punk. And I will do a whole episode about this, I believe, probably most likely tomorrow, about CM Punk returning to WWE and my thoughts on that and everything else going forward with CM Punk and WWE. But speaking of CM Punk, you know, once CM Punk got let go from AEW and Tony Khan had publicly fired CM Punk or Phil Brooks, it hurt Collision bad. I mean, if you guys can't tell that Collision's not the same without Punk, I mean, you guys are insane. Punk, this whole show was wrapped around CM Punk, Phil Brooks. And this stems from the time that Punk had issues with the Elite and Kenny Omega and vice versa. And Tony Khan made this show, Collision, based around CM Punk. This show was for CM Punk. And since CM Punk has been gone, there is no creative direction for this show. There's just not. And that's putting it as nicely as I possibly can. I mean, this Collision show has been horrendous for the past few months. I mean, it's not the same. We're not getting any strong, substantial storylines on Collision that get people invested. I mean, you know, my thing is, even when this tournament was announced, you know, which I'm a big fan of this tournament, and, you know, the names that were announced, you know, the two names that popped in my head that kind of, you know, I was scratching my head on was Jay Lethal and Brody King. And I'm not taking anything away from Brody King or Jay Lethal. They're both great competitors, great wrestlers, 100%. But, you know, there's some names that were left out of this tournament, like Takeshita, Samoa Joe. Now, Samoa Joe obviously has a matchup that takes place, you know, at the Nassau Coliseum against MJF for the World Championship, which, not putting him in the tournament, I understand that. But there's also Takeshita. There's, you know, Malachi Black. So, there's a couple names in this tournament that I feel like were left out that should have been in the tournament. With that being said, though, Collision, you know, Collision's definitely hurting, in my honest opinion, man. And there's a reason why I haven't really covered Collision, because Collision has no sense of direction. They really don't. There's no strong storylines on Collision. There's no build, to be honest with you. Collision is lacking, like, direction, in my honest opinion, man. And for what it's worth, yeah, I'm going to keep covering Collision due to the fact that, you know, obviously the tournament's going on, everybody's invested in the tournament, and myself included. But, I mean, what's true is true, man. Collision is definitely, it's not the same show. It's just not. And I'm sitting there watching this show and looking at these matches and going over my notes, and I'm like, man, this show has just literally took a back seat. I mean, it's the truth. I mean, Collision, when CM Punk was a part of AEW and this show was announced for Collision, I mean, it was all steam ahead for Collision. And this entire show was backed by one person and one person only, and that was CM Punk. Now, maybe that's fault for Tony Khan and AEW to put this entire show on the shoulders of CM Punk. Maybe. I'm not going to say Tony Khan's not guilty on that, but it just goes to show you that they built this entire show around CM Punk. And now that he's no longer with the company, it's showing. Like, it's showing more evident now than ever. I mean, the show is horrendous, man. There's no storylines. There's no creative direction for the show. I mean, it's the same shit that we're getting every Saturday. You know, it's rinse and repeat. Was there some good matches on this show? Yeah, but obviously these matches were good based upon the Continental Classic tournament. And the other match that was solid was Julia Hart defending the TBS Championship against Lady Frost. Besides those matches and Lady Frost and Julia Hart, this show would be shit, to be honest. I mean, there's no investment in this show. And to be honest with you, you know, people can say this or not say this. For what it's worth, you know, a lot of people know that CM Punk joined WWE. And a lot of those CM Punk elitists that were, you know, stuck around with AEW, not knowing what CM Punk was doing next, they're gone, man. They're off the scene. You know, and not for nothing, Monday Night Raw tonight is going to be probably the most watched Monday Night Raw in a very, very long time. For two reasons. One, you got the return of Randy Orton, who's been off the scene with injury for quite a while. And then you get the return of CM Punk, who's been away from WWE for, 8-9 years? I mean, come on, man. You put a live microphone in front of that guy, and he just says whatever the hell he wants to say. Everybody in the world is going to be invested in what CM Punk has to say tonight on Monday Night Raw. 100%. Myself included. I mean, because at the end of the day, nobody thought, I didn't think personally, that CM Punk was even going to go back to WWE after everything that he said about WWE. And obviously there's going to be critics out there that says, oh man, this guy's a hypocrite and yada yada yada. There was no other place for CM Punk to go. He's not going to go to New Japan, and he sure as hell ain't going to Impact Wrestling. They can't afford CM Punk. And there might be some fans out there that, you know, love Impact Wrestling. You know, hey, Hats off to you. But there's no way in hell they were going to afford the services of CM Punk. I mean, at one time they were talking about acquiring CM Punk and Will Ospreay. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So to see CM Punk on Monday Night Raw tonight with a live microphone, yeah, everybody's going to be invested. But, I mean, long story short, when it pertains to CM Punk, it hurt this show. I mean, the entire show was wrapped around CM Punk. And because he's no longer with the company, it's showing, man. I mean, Collision is definitely taking a back seat. The main show for AEW is Dynamite. It always has been, it always will be. That's where the storylines come into play. That's where, obviously pay-per-view matches start to become, getting billed and stuff like that. The identity of who's wearing the devil's mask is only being shown on Dynamite. There's no investment in Collision right now. None. And it's showing. It really is showing. If it wasn't for these Continental Classic Tournament matches and the Julia Hart and Lady Frost match, this show would be awful. If I'm being 100% honest with y'all. But with that being said, this is my review of AEW's Collision. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.